So my name is Patrick Johnston, and I'm just the room host. So it's being recorded. So be aware your face might be shown or your names in your Zoom accounts. Um, and as people come in, their mics will be muted. But the chat is open, so you can ask questions, but you're going to direct them to James.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing to do. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Without further ado, uh, we'll start your panel. So it's a
Okay.
coordinated action. Oh, you can introduce yourselves if you'd
Go
like.
ahead. Yeah, coordinated action research program. So I'm just going to give a basic introduction and overview, and then I'll let each of the teachers present on their own action research. So yeah, that's James, Andy, Amanda, Matthew, Kevin, and we all work at the ELI at Candy University. And this is about a sort of collaborative coordinated action research program. The abstract that we sent in, this is just a bulleted version of it. So Anne Burns, who's been supervising us, she defines action research as contextual and localized research in which you investigate classroom issues. And then that leads you to evaluating, reflecting, and improving your own practice in a kind of a cyclical process. The collaborative aspect means that we all come together and we help review and improve one another's projects through meetings and suggestions. And that kind of contributes to the overall validity of our research. We all work in a Japanese university environment, and that presents a pretty specific variety of challenges for the teachers and researchers. And like I said before, it's a cyclical process. So you identify an issue, you analyze it, you negotiate classroom issues, and then that feeds back in, and the cycle is ongoing. So there are 5 teacher researchers formed the project group. There are initially 6 of us, but one of us has since left. And we're working under the guidance of Professor Anne Burns, who I'll talk more about later on. She's an expert in action research. So the group coordinated the design and the implementation of each of their individual action research projects. But we had regular meetings, both as a group and also one-on-one sessions with Professor Burns. And we discussed progress, made changes, reflected on the experience, and it's kind of ongoing. So this forum will present each researcher's experiences regarding the independent action research projects as members of the group. And it's going to include reflections on receiving guidance from Anne Burns, the expert researcher, group meetings, project design, ethical practices, and classroom experiences. Okay, so this is the brief schedule. I'll introduce and give the background and then talk about the format for today. Andy will talk about literature circles. Amanda will talk about leadership skills. And Kevin and Matthew will talk about exploratory practice. And then in the last minute or so, I'll wrap up. And I believe we'll have some time later on if anybody has some questions. Each presenter will talk for 20 minutes, and then they'll leave 5 minutes for questions specific to their project. And while they're presenting, you can send me any questions you have during the chat, and I'll try and manage those. Okay. So a brief self-introduction. My name is James, and I'm the principal lecturer for research at the English Language Institute in Candy University. And I'm overseeing the project. So I'm setting it up. I approve the research projects. I contact with Anne, organize the meetings. Originally, I was going to do research myself. I was looking at student reticence to speak in the classroom, but then COVID hit. So then I was going to start looking at student reticence on Zoom. But then our university seems to be slowly going back towards face-to-face lessons. So it's kind of on hold at the moment. So for the moment, I'm just overseeing the project and letting the other 3 do their projects. There is the ELI in the new building. That's where we work. Candy University is in Chiba. That's all the ELI teachers. There's over 60 teachers that work in the English Language Institute. And as you can see, we're all from a variety of different countries. And we all have a variety of different research backgrounds. So a couple of people doing PhDs, some people very experienced doing research from their masters or previous jobs. But some people are totally new to research and perhaps find it a little intimidating. To give you an idea of how much variety there is, we have 47 different research communities, which I'll show you. But yeah, like I said, some teachers are completely new to research, and they're kind of the kind of teachers perhaps who would be most interested in action research. Here are some of the example research communities we have. Anything between 3 and 20 people in each of these groups. Including action research. We're lucky to have something called an academic advisory board, and these are like 5 renowned teachers, researchers, experts in various fields in language teaching, linguistics. And Professor Alan Luke, Professor Kern, and Dr. Kubota, they've been with us for about 4 years, and we recruited 2 new members about a year and a half ago. Professor Stephen Ross and Professor Anne Burns, specifically for what we felt was needed. And with Anne, it was all about action research. So she was brought into the Academic Advisory Board as an expert in action research. She visited us about a year ago. She gave 3 talks and lots of individual consultations. And she was mainly talking about what action research is. Then after her visit, a call was sent out, who wants to take part in like a group action research project. Each teacher sent an individual outline to Professor Burns for feedback. Once she okayed it, they sent an approval application to the LI, and that's me and the director. We checked the ethics, we checked the outline, approved it. Yep, and that's how it all started. So these are some slides that Professor Burns has kindly provided. She can't join us today, but she's an honorary professor in University of New South Wales, emeritus professor in Aston University, honorary professor in University of Sydney, and a visiting member of our academic advisory board. So she's pretty well known and respected. What is action research? It's a self-reflected, systematic and critical approach to inquiry in which participants are also researchers. I think Matthew and Kevin will talk about that later on when they talk about exploratory practice. It aims to identify problematic situations or issues and bring about critically informed changes. And it's underpinned by democratic principles. The processes are: you plan, where you identify an issue, you put your plan into action, you observe the effects, and then you reflect further. And as mentioned before, it's a constant cyclical process. Plan, act, observe, reflect, revise your plan, and go around again. So the project group was originally 7 teachers, 6 projects, because Kevin and Matthew are doing one together. 1 member left the Institute, and 2 projects are on hold right now, including my own. So now it's 4 teachers and 3 projects, not including myself. So yep, they sent their outlines to Professor Burns. She made suggestions. I and the director approved the projects. And since then, what we've been doing is we've been having one-on-one sessions with Professor Burns over Skype or Zoom. But we also meet up as a group regularly, about 2 or 3 times a semester. Initially, we were meeting up in person, and then COVID hit, and now we do it via Zoom. And in the meetings, we each kind of summarize the developments of the project, where they're up to at the moment. We offer feedback to one another. And there are lots of different stages they're going through. So we're presenting today, submitting papers. 2 teachers have already submitted, 3 teachers have already submitted their paper to our in-house ELI journal. Another teacher intends to. I can show you that. That's our in-house journal, Literacies and Language Education, Research and Practice. And 2 papers will be out later this month based on the action research that the teachers have been doing in this group. To talk briefly about the main benefits of the action research project group, both doing action research and working with Anne, and also working as a collaborative group. It's the mutual support that you get. You don't feel alone, especially this year where we're all sort of working from home. The idea to share will be the benefits of sharing ideas and a structured time frame. So if you know that everybody else is organized and up to speed on their own research, it kind of gives you a subtle pressure to make sure you're organized too. So then I asked each of the teachers what their overall reflections are on doing action research, and here's a brief bulleted summary. So for Andy, the biggest positive was the actual impact it had on his classes, or it is having on his classes. It's helped him to improve his lessons. The students receive a better learning experience as a result. One negative he feels is the amount of data that can be overwhelming. Oh, wow. Okay, Kevin, thank you. So I'll quickly go through these. It's not possible to focus on all things you're unsatisfied with in a class. So he's learned it's important to start with a fairly narrow focus, or it can become too big. And that narrow focus also gives scope to address other problems that you might not have noticed before as they arise. For Amanda, she said she'd been struggling with her own action research project for 4 years, so she really appreciated getting guidance and feedback this last year from a very approachable and insightful expert. She also enjoyed the support of colleagues at various stages of their own action research. She could see how dynamic these projects were in terms of timing world events and her own personal challenges, and that then helped inspire her to do her own. Matthew's been frustrated in the past with student-centered classrooms, critical pedagogy, etc. So this project group, it introduced him to action research, and specifically participatory action research, exploratory practice. This allowed him to give students a voice. Their voices are valuable because they themselves take part in the research. And it's useful in uncovering puzzles. It's a novel approach, a leap of faith, but so far he's found it motivating and positive. And Kevin, his co-researcher, he likes hearing from others about their own detailed decision-making. And in contrast to a conference where you hear a finished product, he likes the idea of a process and the fluid decision-making that takes place as we go. And he sees it as an extension of the project, a process of collaboration and mutual discovery. Okay, so here's the format then. I'll let the others speak. 3 projects. Andy will speak for 20 minutes plus 5 minutes question answer. Then Amanda, then Kevin and Matthew. And if you have any questions, please maybe best direct them to me in the chat. And we'll try and address those in 5 minutes. Okay. Oh yeah, and okay, well, Andy's next, and I'll get in touch with Amanda. Okay. All right, so that's me then. Andy, are you all good to start?
Yep, ready. Okay, can you see my slides okay? Okay, perfect. All right, hi everybody. Thanks for coming to today's forum. So my section is about my action research paper, but also about the group and my experience working with the other people in the group, and also Professor Burns. So the title of my project is Literature Circles in ELT, so increasing student autonomy through literature response logs. Okay, so first I'll give you an overview of the study. So it's a 2-stage action research project involving literature circles, also known as reading circles. It's the same thing. So this study chronicles students' experiences moving from an assigned role framework to reading response logs. Don't worry, I'll explain what those mean if you're not sure. The project aimed to gauge if the students were ready for the change and whether it improved their literature circle discussions. So basically very controlled, telling them what to do, moving to something much freer. Okay, so I'll give you a brief summary of literature circles first. So they came to prominence in the early 1990s in the USA. So they involve small temporary discussion groups of students who have read the same text. Could be a book, could be a graded reader, could be a newspaper article, anything is okay. They often involve the use of assigned role sheets. So assigned role sheets are designed to provide clearly defined tasks to guide students' preparation, to help them know what to do. Examples of roles that can be rotated are summarizer, connector, discussion leader. I'll show you one of these on the next slide. They ensure each student has a different cognitive purpose for reading, and their interactive purpose is different in the discussion each time too. So it's to give them a variety of experiences in reading circles. Okay, so on this page, you can see an example of one of the roles. So this is the passage person. So you can see the instructions are at the top of the page. So they have to read the story, then make notes about 3 passages. Okay, so these can be about characters or about language. It's their choice, basically. They need to read the passage to the group and then ask the group 1 or 2 questions about it. So you can see the table they fill in here. So the page and the lines in the text, why they chose it, and then the questions for the group. Okay, so this is one example of one of the assigned role sheets. So criticism of role sheets. So what's the problem with them? Why did I want to change? So role sheets potentially stifle conversations. They limit what students discuss. Students think they can only talk about what's on their sheet and nothing else. Also, students become overly dependent on role sheets. So they can become very mechanical, the conversations, if they're going in the same order every time, can get a bit boring for them. And the amount of preparation varies according to the role. So for example, discussion leader just writes 5 questions. The passage person, as I just showed you, has to write out the text, why they chose it, and some questions as well. So the preparation can be different too. So one possible solution for this is just using role sheets to start off with. So a temporary support structure as students get used to reading circles. So of course, when they begin, they need to know what they can talk about. So you can't just start free straight away, otherwise students wouldn't know what to do. So start with the role sheets and then move on to something else. So that something else can be reading response logs. So once they're used to reading circles, you can introduce these. Again, I'll show you an example on the next slide. But basically, students put post-it notes on the text anytime something notable or something interesting pops up, put a post-it note on, and then they can discuss these in class with their classmates. Okay, so let me show you. So this is the second page of the reading response log that I use. The first page has the instructions and some examples of types of responses. You can see at the top, I've given an example. The study I'm going to talk about, the students had to read A Christmas Carol. So if you look at my example, I actually picked it out from the book. And I tried to think of something the students might notice, something realistic the students could actually produce themselves as my example. So that's there so they know what to do. Also, they know what kind of detail they should be writing in the log as well. And then the bottom, you see their spaces. So entry 1, entry 2, entry 3. So these are free choices about anything they want to talk about in the book. Okay, so my research questions were as follows. So number 1, how did changing from assigned roles to reading response logs affect the literature circle discussions? And second, how did the students feel about the change? Okay, so when I first designed the study, this was what I was looking at. So study description, the participants were second year students, so sophomores from my advanced reading class. And I asked them to read a graded reader version of Christmas Carol by Dickens. This was Shepherd B1 level. And the book was divided into two parts. So the first half of the book was for class 1. So the students had to read it and then complete their assigned role sheet. They decided their own roles in their groups. And then for the second class, they had to read the second half of the book, but this time complete a reading response log. Students had 2 weeks to prepare for each of the classes. So I gave them the book, and then they had 2 weeks to read it, prepare for class 1, and then 2 weeks to read the second half of the book. And then we had the second recorded class. And then I audio recorded all the students' discussions, class 1 and class 2. So there were 4 groups of 4 or 5 students. So I had 4 audio recordings for both classes, so a total of 8 audio recordings. After I finished the recording, then I analyzed the recordings, also the students' preparation. So the students had to submit their preparation on Google Classroom. And they also completed a post-study questionnaire. So after the second recorded lesson, the students completed a questionnaire. Okay, so my progress so far on this project. So yeah, the recordings were all completed successfully. That was a big relief. That was really stressful, to be honest. And yeah, something to think about in future. I was totally reliant on the audio recorders working. I put one in the middle of the table for each group. And if any of the recording, if the batteries had run out or a student had pressed the stop button or something like that, then yeah, it really would have affected my study. So that was a big relief that all 8 recordings were okay and audible. The questionnaire was administered as planned, so I got all the feedback from the students. When I transcribed the audio recordings, I had an overwhelming amount of data. So this was a huge problem. I transcribed the first one, the first group from the first study. It was about 15 pages long of a Google Doc, writing in normal size font. So it was about 15 pages long, and then I had to do that 7 more times. So it took a really long time, and I'm left with a huge amount of data to look at as well. So basically my original plan of 1 study, yeah, it wasn't feasible. There was no way I was going to be able to write about all of the data I'd collected and analyze it properly and make recommendations. So I thought I needed to break it up. So I basically revised the plan into 2 parts instead. So part 1, I decided to focus on how to maximize the benefits of assigned roles in literature circles classes. So when students start out, obviously the assigned roles are important to get them used to reading circles and give them some ideas what to discuss about. So basically, yeah, how to maximize the benefits of those classes. So I finished that, yeah, this past summer. And as James showed you at the start of this presentation, the Canda in-house journal, it's going to be published in there this fall. And then part 2 will focus on students transitioning to reading response logs. So using the data, the audio data from my second recorded class, I'll look at, yeah, how to move to reading response logs, how well the students dealt with it. So that's currently a work in progress. That's what I'm working on now, having just finished the first part. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that's basically my study, kind of an overview, what I did, where I am. I'm now going to talk about my experience of being in the action research group. So yeah, for me, I think it's really interesting to hear about colleagues' action research projects, particularly given the broad range of topics chosen. So you're going to see that today when you listen to Amanda, when you listen to Matthew and Kevin. We're all totally different, not related at all, which is great because, yeah, then it's interesting to find out what other people are doing, different angles. Secondly, yeah, the possibility to receive expert input from Professor Burns was really big for me as well. Yeah, it's not an opportunity you get very often. I remember when I was studying for my MA, I wrote about action research in my dissertation. And yeah, I was quoting Burns over and over again. So it was, yeah, it was a bit of a surprise really to find out that she was coming to the university I was working, and then to actually, yeah, be able to talk with her about my action research was a great opportunity. And then, yeah, finally, it wasn't just group meetings that I could participate in as well. So we've had meetings just between ourselves and then group meetings with Professor Burns too. But I also could have one-on-one Skype meetings with Anne too, which was really useful. So I'll talk about those meetings next. Just to give you some background, the first meeting I had was just before I recorded the 2 classes. So just before I was about to collect my data. And the second meeting was as I analyzed the data. So I'd typed everything out and I was looking through all the transcripts and trying to pick things out, getting ready to write up the findings. Okay, so meeting 1. So yeah, as it says here, I was feeling somewhat daunted. Fears of my project not being worthy of Professor Burns's time. But she was really encouraging in our first meeting. She genuinely, yeah, seemed interested in the study. We discussed my data collection plans. We looked over the reading response log. That was particularly useful. So I wasn't really sure about how much scaffolding to have in the reading response log, how much help the students still needed. So yeah, we spent quite a long time looking at the reading response log that I was going to give to students to help them prepare for the second recorded class. So that was really useful. And then, yeah, it gave me increased confidence in my study design. So Professor Burns isn't actually, doesn't have a background in reading circles particularly. But yeah, she could still give me lots of really useful advice about, yeah, how to run the study. The second meeting was earlier this year, so in March. So I'd finished typing up all the transcriptions and I was totally overwhelmed with all the data I'd collected. So I wasn't really sure how to handle it, what to do. So in the second meeting with Professor Burns, we talked about how to divide the study up and also future avenues for research as well, like further things I could do. So she was giving, yeah, other suggestions for like future cycles and other things I could do with the data I had as well. Another thing I wasn't really sure about was publishing, like where I could publish the work. So yeah, I had an idea in mind to publish one part in our in-house journal, but I wanted to publish yeah, one of the other studies outside. So yeah, talking to Professor Burns, she had lots of ideas about different journals in different places that might be interested in my final piece. So again, yeah, the meeting not only helped put my mind at ease and made me less worried about everything, but also made the project feel more valid as well. So yeah, that was really useful. Okay, so talking about overall reflections from this project. So yeah, if I'm doing action research again in the future, and yeah, for any of you guys doing action research, I'd strongly recommend having a very narrow focus to begin with. So I think mine was a bit too ambitious. And yeah, I'll explain like why that was a problem. So first of all, you need to consider how much data is required and how much you can handle. So yeah, 15 pages of transcription times 8. It's really hard to look through all that and you're going to miss things, I think. Plus, maybe there's things you see that you can't pick up on because, yeah, you just can't fit it into your study. Next one, issues might arise during the study you'd not planned for. So things could come up unexpected, and yeah, if you've got this really wide focus, again, like dealing with those is really tough, I think. Whereas if you have a narrow focus, you can go off on a tangent a little bit and you can incorporate those into your study. And then probably most importantly, ensure the write-up is manageable. So mine wasn't. So a lot of journals have a 3,000 or 4,000 word limit. Other ones, yeah, you might get up to like 7,000, something like that for this kind of study. But yeah, there was no way. I was looking at well over 10,000 words if I was going to do both of these things together. So yeah, again, you need to think about that as well if you're interested in publishing your results afterwards. And then second kind of overall reflection from this project is make the most of opportunities for expert guidance, so if you have them. So yeah, I was really lucky to be able to talk to Professor Burns about my project, but you should plan carefully what you want to ask about, because yeah, you're not going to have unlimited opportunities. There's obviously a time limit set on it. So yeah, it's good to plan carefully what you want to ask about and what you want to focus on, what information you really need from that person before the meeting. Second point is kind of random, was just lucky. So writing a summary of what was discussed. So actually, when we finished the first meeting, when I finished the first meeting with Professor Burns, she asked me to write a summary of our meeting, just a brief summary of what we discussed, and then email it to her. And I think we'll probably use this later when we're writing something about the project. But actually, this was really useful to refer back to later. So often when you have a meeting, you tend to forget things. So it kind of served like minutes basically for the meeting. So yeah, even now I can just type in Professor Burns' name in my kind of email check, and then it comes up, and then I can see exactly what we talked about in the two meetings. So I can refresh my memory really easily. So yeah, summary of what was discussed is really useful. And then finally, don't be intimidated. Yeah, I mean, because Professor Burns is a big name. I kind of felt, yeah, like this is a bit scary, but yeah, it's not at all. And I'm sure, like most people in this field, just like Professor Burns, just want to help and are really interested to see what other people are doing. Yeah. Okay, so that's all from me for my part of the presentation. So we'll move on to Amanda after I've finished. But yeah, thank you very much for listening to my presentation within today's forum. If you have any questions about anything I covered today, please don't hesitate to ask me. You can see my email address down the bottom of the screen. So I'll stop screen sharing now. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, then yeah, I'd love to hear them.
Hi, Andy. Thanks very much for doing that. And Lee Shin has a question. Lee Shin, would you like to just unmute and ask him directly?
Hello, Andy.
Hi, Lee
Thank you
Shin.
for the presentation.
Thanks.
So you talked a lot about data collection and how and the fact that you ended up with a lot of data. And I was just wondering, before you started collecting data, did you have an idea what you were looking for? Are you looking for measurable outcomes to compare the before and after?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a combination. So I was looking at the preparation and the conversations in class as well. So basically how detailed the preparation was, but also in the class, like kind of how lively they were, if there were like extended discussions, how long they could talk about one thing, like were they interested in it or not. So yeah, I think maybe that was the problem. It was so open that it was kind of hard to pin down things, but lots of issues came up, and like some unexpected things as well. That so, for example, one group, you know, just weren't into it at all and finished early. And when I came round, they kind of went back to it for a bit and then didn't do it anymore. I wasn't expecting that. It was kind of a nasty shock, but it was, you know, it was useful to know. And then when I looked at their preparation, it wasn't as good as other groups and it wasn't as detailed, and they just didn't have you know, all the questions weren't very thoughtful. They were just like kind of test questions about the text and things like that. So then I could think about, oh, how can I avoid them, like, you know, doing comprehension check questions on each other and things like that.
Thank you. Are you planning on having measurable outcomes? Like, instead of saying, you know, this happened, like, I think they did this better. Like, do you have measurable, are you planning to have measurable, you know, ways to measure? Statistics and
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit difficult, I think, to be honest, because it's kind of my opinion, I guess. You know, when I listen, when I look at the transcripts, it's kind of my opinion, and then what I know about them, it's because it's all qualitative. And like, is the conversation better or not? It's kind of hard to quantify, I think.
Thank you, Andy. Good job.
Thank you.
All right, Andy. Kevin had a question too. I've sent it to you, but Kevin, do you want to just say it out loud anyway?
Yeah, maybe it's quick, but I do. You mentioned you started with one of more structured reading circle roles, and then you were wondering if it's better to, I don't know the exact wording you said, but to sort of loosen up on that scaffolding. I was wondering if in your data, did you see that the roles were helpful? What was it? Were they talking more when they didn't have roles? Did the data influence that part of it at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think the next thing I need to think about is like how many like lessons in roles. I mean, I think it's got to be at least 4. You'd have to do like at least 4 lessons in the roles, because they have to experience the different roles before they'd know what they could include in the reading response log, the like freer one, right? So yeah, I think like just off the top of my head at the moment, I'd say at least 4, and then it really depends on the students. Like, some of them can do it really well, whereas other ones need a lot of guidance. So I think it's, again, reading circles is really tough to make recommendations, because it really depends on the students. And the class that I did the observation on were like really kind of got on really well, really motivated. Like, they were a better class, I think, for reading circles and like showing improvement than other classes I've had. So even if I said like, oh, they needed 4, I'm not sure that would apply for other classes. You know, it's a bit tough.
I see. Thank you.
Cheers.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions for Andy? He's got a couple of minutes left before Amanda's due to start. No.
Hi, this is Cam. Thank you for the presentation.
Hi.
I was wondering, did you look at, or are you planning to look at different texts in the future? Because that could also be a reflection of the students' engagement, depending on if they liked the text or not.
Yeah, I mean, I do these as a regular part of my classes. So yeah, I've used Christmas Carol. I've used Sleepy Hollow. I've used, what else have I been doing? Billy Elliot. So I've used a variety. Like, for an actual study, I'm not sure when I'm going to like do another one, because I've got so much to work on with this one. But yeah, definitely. That's a part, and I do ask the students about, you know, how they feel about the book, and some of them do go, oh, this is boring, or I like this one, I didn't like this one. So I'm sure it, yeah, absolutely has an impact. So yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, I try to use a variety of texts in class for that reason, but in terms of doing an action research like project on one, I'm not sure when I'd be able to start the next one.
I see. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, then. I think that's all, unless anyone else has a question. Thanks very much for that, Andy. Very clear and perfect timing too.
Okay, cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Amanda, are you all good to start?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I have the screen sharing rights, Patrick?
Yeah, if you're
Thank you.
opposed, Amanda. Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. Okay. Okay, so my action research is related to the development of the leadership skills in my students' group work. I'm going to actually be going over the history of my action research project because this is the 5th year I've been working on this project, but this is also the 1st year I'm going to be writing it up with data. So it's an important year for me. Okay, so the history of my project actually started in 2016 when I was working at a university in Tokyo. At that time, I had a coworker who shared 2 groups of students with me. She taught speaking, I taught writing, and we had another class that we shared as well. And so we felt like there were problems with our classes or with our students, and we couldn't quite put a finger on it. So we decided to do a pre-cycle of the action research. And what that means is you sort of observe your students for a period to find out what the problems are. And then you decide what you want to address and how you want to address those problems. So what we did was we had a collaborative teaching diary. We basically shared a Google Doc where we wrote our diary entries in the same doc, and we could read each other's entries. And we did that for about 1 year. And at the end of the year, I analyzed the data that came out of that diary and came up with a list of issues that I felt could possibly be addressed through action research. Of course, you can't address everything, but the three of the main issues we found were, we felt that the students lacked initiative, they lacked a sense of accountability, and they lacked opportunities to communicate with each other freely and also with their own teachers. So we decided to create an AR project that addressed those issues. And what we came up with in year 2 was something called Coffee Talk. Actually, I called it Coffee Talk and she called it Talk Time. But it's basically just a warm up at the beginning of class where the students have 10 minutes or so to talk freely about easy topics that they can all kind of relate to. And we decided that it would be important to have a group leader for each time, so that that leader was kind of in charge of the 10-minute time period, and they could make sure that that they stayed on topic and that they spoke English and things like that. We didn't give too much direction in that first year, but that was basically what our idea was. We also changed the groups every time, and we let the students choose the topics themselves. So unfortunately, in cycle 2, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess it's fortunately, I changed jobs and came to work at Conda. So I had a big decision to make. Do I want to continue my AR with a totally different set of students without my partner, or should I just give up? And I decided I really liked what we had achieved the last 2 years, and I wanted to continue on my own. So at Conda, what I have done is I've continued doing it, but it's quite a process to get permission to do research and collect data at Conda. So I kind of sat on it for a couple of years and just continued doing it, but not in a way that I was collecting data. So in cycle 2, I made a few changes. One thing I decided was we would do the coffee talk at the beginning of the class, the 10-minute warm up at the beginning of class, but the leader would continue being the leader for all of the activities throughout the whole lesson. And the groups would change every class. And at the end of their experience being the leader, they were to write in their journal about how their experience was being a leader. So that was the first time I was actually seeing the students' reflections on their own experiences. But again, I was not collecting it as data. In cycle 3, I still didn't get permission to do the research. I was doing other projects and just couldn't get to it. But I didn't make any changes. But this time I decided to really observe if there were any problems, because I thought next year for sure I'm going to get the permission and do this as a research project. Some of the issues I found were that the students didn't really reflect very deeply. They needed a little bit of help scaffolding with reflection. And also, I didn't think that I was effectively, I guess, I didn't know how my advice or ideas about how to be a good leader were really reaching the students. So I decided to make a few changes for this year. One of the things that came up though was that Professor Burns came to our university and she offered to do this coordinated action research program with us. And I was excited to be a part of it because I thought now's finally my chance. I will put in for permission to collect data and I will do it right this time. So that's where we are now with cycle 4. I made a few changes though, and part of it is based on the fact that we're online this year. I decided to keep the students with the same groups for the entire unit, and a unit runs from 4 to 6 weeks. So I thought if they're in the same unit, if they're in the same group for the whole unit, they can get to know each other. They can each take a turn being the leader. They can get comfortable with each other. And I also had to decide how I was going to collect the data. So I'll talk about that a little bit more, but I wanted to collect data in such a way that I could address the self-reflection issues and the teacher efficacy issues. Okay, so this comes to telling you about the current year. So my students are in their second year of school, and there's about 20 students in each class, and I only collected data for the spring semester, okay? They're in a immediate English class, which is a required class at our university. I collected the data using a Google Form survey. I also sent emails to the students after they had experienced being a leader and filled out the survey. And then I made slides to introduce advice to the students in the following class, which I will explain how that worked in the next slide. The research questions that I came up with, I actually, came up with some questions on my own, and then Ann Burns, gave advice about how to reformulate the questions and make them, I guess, better for getting the data you want out of it. So my questions were looking at what aspects do the learners focus on in their own reflections? What kinds of improvements do the learners seem to notice in themselves as we progress through the semester? And number 3, does it seem like my input in terms of the slides that I'm going to show you, as well as my individualized emails, does it seem like that's contributing to their experiences? So here's some examples of my data collection tools. I just wanted to show you the Google Form survey the students had to fill out was very simple. It had 3 questions. They had to fill out this little Likert scale of how did you feel during the group work today, and then give me a summary of what you talked about. And I would get all kinds of summaries. I didn't tell them how to write a summary, but I just said, like, just let me know what you guys did in class today. And some students would write, well, Aya did this, and Satoru talked about this, and they would actually write really detailed summaries. But some students would just give me a rundown of what the lesson was that day. And then the third question was, how might you improve? These are the same questions I've been asking them for the last 3 years in their reflection journals. So I didn't think it was a big jump to go to this. But when I look at this now, I kind of think next year I'll probably change this question to something a little bit more positive, like what did you do well, and what would you improve? But anyway, what I asked them was, how might you improve for the next time? Just to note, they have an opportunity to be the leader about 4 times per semester. So they have 4 chances to improve, I suppose, or 3 chances to improve. The data would come into the Google form, and then I would move it into a Google Sheets and then color it. And what I would do in the Google Sheets as I was progressing through the semester was I would look at their answers. So this is just a screenshot of things that they would put in their survey. But I would look at their answers, and then I would write my response right in the Google form, in the, not the Google form, this sheet. I would write it right in the spreadsheet, and then I would copy and paste it into an email for that student. So it was tough to keep up with this every week, but I only had 10 students, so that's 5 students per class who were the leaders that week, and I could pretty much keep up with it. So I would try to send them an email before the next class, just to encourage them, give them positive as well as some ideas for improvement. Sometimes I would send them a link to a resource that might be helpful if they were looking for something, if they felt like they needed something. And from all of this, I would make a kind of theme. So now I'm starting to sort of pull some themes out, right? So I would make a theme that I could then feed back to the class in the following lesson. So I would make these themes, and then I would put these onto a slide, and I would show this to the class at the beginning. And I would say, this is advice, or these are ideas, or these are issues that are coming up from the students who were leaders last week. So I'm just delivering the message to you. So I wasn't making it seem like it was coming from me. I wanted them to realize it was coming from them. These were challenges that they were dealing with, and that they would probably be dealing with again today if they become the leader. And this is something you can think about. I usually started out like the beginning of the semester, very gentle questions like, how can you do this? What can you do? And then towards the end of the semester, I would just give them the themes. I tried never to be demanding about or commanding. I would never say, do this, don't do that, do this. I would make it seem a lot more gentle than that. All right, so currently in my stage of research, I'm not collecting data actively this semester. So what I'm working on is organizing the themes into themes and sub-themes. I'm looking at the changes and the progress over time, over the semester regarding individuals, because they had like 4 or 5 chances to be the leader, as well as a whole class. I had 2 different classes, but they were different levels of English. So they had different challenges that they were dealing with. So I noticed that they kind of noticed things about themselves in a different order. So like the higher level students noticed right away about the challenges of turn taking and the challenges of getting someone to stop talking, you know, and just things like that. So these were things I noticed. I also need to work on my lit review. I'm one of those researchers who waits until way too late to do her lit review. So here I am, still gathering books and papers and things that I can read. But Professor Burns suggested looking at these 3 areas, and she's given me advice about authors I can look at and papers I can look up. So learner agency, leadership skills, and group dynamics. These are not necessarily areas of research that I am really versed in. I typically do reflective practices, teaching diaries, things like that. So this is a kind of new area to me. So if anybody has advice, please let me know. Okay, so as for the meetings with Ann Burns, in December, we had to give a proposal, a written proposal, and she gave feedback on that. And then I had a Skype meeting with her in March, and then in August, I had another Skype meeting with her. And so these are the topics we covered at that time. And like Andy said, I wrote a summary afterwards and sent it to her because I think she's using it for research. So for me, it was also very helpful to have that summary because I was able to look back and make the slide, for example. So that was really helpful. Okay, so just wrapping up, a couple of things that I realized by kind of working on this with Anne and also with our group. It was really helpful to discuss my insecurities and all the problems I had. I mean, the first 4 years of doing this research project on my own or with my partner at first, I had a lot of reservations about it. I felt like I had really messed up or that it wasn't going anywhere. So she was very helpful on talking me back from the ledge. She also just gives advice and doesn't interfere. She just encourages, gives advice very gently. And she's a very nice lady. I really enjoyed talking with her. So for the most part, it's been a really positive experience. Okay, so I can stop now. And if you have any questions or if you'd like to email me later, feel free to email me at this email. Okay. All right, I'm finished if you guys have questions.
Oh, wow, that was really, yeah, you went through that, eh? Well done, Amanda, thank you. Does anyone have, oh, Kevin has a question for you.
Yeah,
Hi, Kevin.
great, thanks for that. That was really interesting. I wanted to ask about, you were talking about using the student reflections to highlight common themes, and then you'd come back to the class and say, these are from you, from the group leaders last week, which I love that idea. I think that's really good. I want to try that. I wanted to know did student themes ever repeat or get redundant? Not maybe in a little negative way. Did they ever, yeah, just that, I guess, just that. Did they ever repeat or get redundant?
There were, I wouldn't say they were redundant because things like time management, taking notes effectively or efficiently, because they were expected to come back to the whole class and give like a summary of what their group had discussed or pick one surprising thing and just tell the class about it. And so they felt a lot of pressure to take notes. And so there were things that came up repeatedly, but I wouldn't say they were redundant because there were always new things as well. When I noticed stuff was coming up repeatedly, I would try to give them some kind of resource that they could use, or I would give them a little mini lesson on how to do it, so that they had something to take away from it. And the good thing about it was bottom up. So it wasn't what they should do. It was them saying, we need this. How do I do it? And then, I think I hope they could receive it much better that way. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amanda, I have a question, if you don't mind.
Oh God, okay. No, kidding.
You know, where you earlier talked about how different level students were at different stages and what they noticed.
Yeah.
Did the lower level students notice anything that the higher level students didn't?
Oh gosh, that's a good question, and I'd have to look back at my data, really looking for that. But that's a really good avenue to check on for as I'm analyzing, and I'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah,
I did notice the higher levels were noticing things that the lower ones weren't.
Okay, but not
But
necessarily.
the other way around is a good question. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Amanda? We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so please ask any questions that you want to. Yeah. She's given her email address there too, and did you say you might be in the hangout rooms too later, Amanda, if anyone has
Well, I guess we're staying here if anybody
Yeah.
wants to ask us. Yeah, I'll be here. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you. That was really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So Kevin and Matthew, are you guys good to go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me get this going here.
We're ahead of schedule, so I won't send you any timing reminders or anything. You have you have up to half an hour to get this, so just go at your own pace.
Let me make sure here. Share that. Okay, is that all right? You guys can see that large.
Yep.
That's fine. Okay, that's great. All right, great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, really enjoyed hearing from James and Andy and Amanda. You're going to see some similar themes here, of course, as part of the same group, but there'll be a little bit of a twist as we're talking about exploratory practice. So we'll explain the differences as we're coming to understand them, as we're doing the research. You'll notice off the bat, there's 2 of us, so our experience is going to be different in that way, and we hope that's interesting to reflect on. So, right, I'll start. I'll talk about action research, exploratory practice. James touched on it, sort of the theory of action research, and I'm going to try to distinguish that and talk about exploratory practice as a further iteration of action research. I'll explain about the context. Matthew is teaching the course. I am the co-researcher. So he and I have meetings, we work on lesson planning and course development, and then he'll go back and teach it, and then we'll have another meeting. It's this kind of cycle that we're going through. So we're talking about a genre-based reading and writing class in a Japanese university. From there, I'll hand it off to Matthew. He'll reflect on his experience as the instructor and get into the detail of what he's doing in the course. And finally, we'll have reflections on the group as a whole. Working with the group, sorry. And yeah, and then as with the others, a brief question answer. All right, so the background. This is very similar to what James showed earlier, is that sort of cycle. So you have a plan, you act, you observe, you reflect, you come back in, you revise, and on and on and on. We've got the infamous, that's negative. The famous Professor Burns, the quotations here explaining. She's been great. She's been really helpful, as the others have said, to sort of frame the research and introduce us to authors that we can use. So the core here, self-reflective, systematic, critical approach by participants who are at the same time members of the research community. So participant researchers are teachers who seek to deeply and reflectively analyze their own classroom, essentially. We were excited by those ideas, but we took a little bit of a different turn. In our case, we were less focused on changes in practice, less focused on having a problem and trying to solve it, or trying to identify a problem and then reach a solution. We were actually looking at involving students in the research process. And the research we found, in large part thanks to meeting with Professor Burns, at first participatory action research, which then brought us to exploratory practice. And the author, Richard Allwright, had a very clear definition of this. So I want to walk through a bit of what he says to distinguish it a little bit from action research. The first thing is you have practitioners who are preferably teachers and learners together. So the students themselves are also taking part in it. And we're looking at what they, or we in this case, what we want to understand, following our own agendas. So the big difference that I hope will make it clear is the problems were actually, they were language learning puzzles from the students. We asked the students first and foremost, what are you having trouble with learning language? And how can you use the group projects and class projects to investigate those puzzles? So to motivate them to use the coursework to look at their own language learning. And so as a result, it's not necessarily about changing something or changing a class or totally reinventing something. The focus is instead using the normal practices from the class as investigative tools. So it's part of the teaching and learning, it's not extra. One of the things this author Allwright is focused on is the researcher-teacher praxis. And how do we balance those roles? If you've got a full course load and you've got publications, how do you balance these two? And his solution is to say, try to integrate them and look at the classroom as a place to improve upon through normal practices, not adding something extra or external. And yeah, so this issue of burnout. This process is meant to be indefinitely sustainable. It's just part of the normal practice. This is meant to contribute to the teaching and learning of themselves. Both teachers and learners are teaching and learning for themselves and for professional development. Right, so that's all fine. How about the class, the context? Well, we're talking about a first-year reading and writing course. In essence, 15-week course, meeting 4 times a week. Of course, this year was online. and it's 2 semesters. As you can imagine, that's a lot of contact hours. That could work out to a maximum of maybe 6 contact hours in a week. So there's a lot of contact hours, approximately 20 students, I believe 21 students. This is Matthew's class. And the course takes a genre approach. In essence, it means you're teaching writing conventions via the demonstration and recreation of general use genres. So procedural texts, informational reports. Matthew will talk in detail about that to hopefully make it clear. But that genre approach is how the exploratory practice is done. It's through those projects and those that student output that they're investigating puzzles that they've found out about. In addition to the class, we had the group, of course, with James and Amanda and Andy and Professor Burns. So we had meetings throughout the year. And yeah, as you can see, there's 2 of us in our sort of group within a group, right? There's 2 of us working. So Matthew, the teacher and researcher, and myself, the co-researcher. Yeah, and our teacher, researcher. So adapting exploratory practice to the genre approach. It actually turned out to be a pretty good fit, which was really good. So a core tenet is using existing practices. Specifically, for this class, that means the genre learning cycle. So you introduce a new genre, you analyze the conventions, you use group work to reconstruct or deconstruct that genre, you have individual construction, and finally reflection. So each of these processes worked really well when you're talking about investigating, the students investigating their own puzzle, their own agency. So it provided the course structure. It adhered to the departmental objectives. It was a good match. We weren't going outside the course. We weren't changing the course dramatically. The course was still working, but now the content was much more focused on the students. So ideally, EP, exploratory practice, will provide student autonomy and give them some ownership and encourages buy-in. And I'm going to turn it over to Matthew. He's going to talk about that a bit.
Thanks, Kevin. This is my first time talking today. How's the volume? Everybody hear me okay? Okay, I'll let Kevin continue with the slideshow though and just change as necessary. I'd like to explain how exploratory practice and the procedures recommended by Dick Allwright, how those map nicely onto a genre approach to a reading and writing course. So Allwright suggested, I think, 8 exploratory practice procedures in a given research project, but we've kind of simplified that for our sake, for our purposes, down to 6 important steps in exploratory practice. And those do map nicely onto a given genre project because of the genre learning cycle. This specific example is of information report, which is one of the standard genres that at KUIS, at Konda University, that the freshmen engage with in this class. So here we can see that the first step in exploratory practice is to identify a puzzle area. And Allwright recommended the term puzzle rather than problem, and I think that's one of the ways it differentiates from action research. We're not trying to solve a problem necessarily. It might, but rather it may not even be a problem. It may just be a question that students have about language learning. It may be something they can't solve, but they need to understand it more deeply. So we did use the metaphor of the puzzle and showed them there may be a puzzle you can't solve, but if you understand it better, or you understand how that puzzle works, how the pieces come together, that's great. So first they identify a puzzle area. And in our case, that might be a language learning category like vocabulary or speaking issues, so on. They talk together in groups, and then they write reflective journals. So as you can see, we're just using existing classroom practices. The next step in exploratory practice is to refine that thinking. So they come back, and this is where they start gravitating towards other like-minded students, other students who had similar puzzles that they were thinking about. So we ended up with 7 groups, 3 students each, and those groups gravitated towards a vocabulary group or speaking English with confidence group or ensuring English only and breakout rooms group. So they kind of gravitated towards groups that had similar interests. The third EP procedure that we incorporated is to hone in on a particular topic. So this is where groups come back after a day and they choose a specific topic. We gave them models and examples, and they were usually in question form. One specific example is, what is a fun yet effective way to learn new vocabulary? And this was student selected, right? We did provide models, but ultimately the students chose topics that were important or interesting or essential for them. And then we get into how this research is conducted. Step 4, it's done using existing classroom procedures. So we're not introducing kind of third-party research elements. We're not trying to shoehorn in kind of special research tools, but rather using the genre itself, in this case, the information report. So they're learning the conventions of how to put together an information report, conducting primary and secondary research. The teacher kind of walks them through that, and then they do it. They conduct interviews with their classmates, or they send out questionnaires to their classmates or to teachers and so on. Anything that fits their puzzle, so that is kind of self-directed. They move on to the next step, which is to interpret outcomes. So basically they analyze their findings. What were the answers to their questionnaires? What data can they analyze? What patterns can they find? What information did they find from secondary research, right, from reading literature? And they construct an information report based on those genre conventions. And the final step of exploratory practice that we are using is for them to decide the implications of their research. So basically, what does all of that mean? For some of them, they conclude their report with a summary, and then they explain their newfound understanding of puzzles, or they may have suggestions for future research if they didn't quite get what they needed, or they may have good suggestions for students in terms of action they can take. And this is where it could evolve into action research within the classroom. They found an issue and they have suggested a way to solve it. So that's kind of how EP maps nicely onto one example project. Okay, thanks. Let's go to the next slide. Basically, to share some specific student EP puzzles from this year's pilot project. This is a list of the 7 topics that the groups came up with. And you can see if you glance over it that those are topics that students themselves are interested in. A lot of them are interested in ways to speak English better or more confidently. And a lot of them were also interested in how to learn or retain vocabulary better. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to kind of summarizing how the semester works. Basically, that it's cyclical, a balance between structure. In this case, the structure takes the form of teacher lectures or models, examples, assignments, and so on, and autonomy. That's the other end of the scale. This is granted to students in terms of the research topics that they want to research. The flexible schedule, we're able to adjust it to their needs. They decide and lead their own group projects in terms of conducting research, waiting on the questionnaires to come back, analyzing that data, and so on. But while this cycle is happening between teacher-led kind of structured course content and autonomous kind of free student-led content, there is an ongoing teacher-student co-research going that's happening in the classroom, because the primary purpose of exploratory practice is understanding the quality of life in this specific classroom, right? Not trying to take literature that's out of context and mapping it onto our class, but rather what do our students want and need? What do our teachers want to need here? And what are our puzzles that we want to solve? In terms of this research project and Kevin and my data collection, we do want to reiterate that exploratory practice does use existing pedagogical practices rather than kind of introducing new data collection methods. So basically, we used pre-existing activities, activities that I already did in freshman reading and writing. The primary source of data was student journals, so qualitative data, extensive reflection, and it was informal. The initial feedback we got from students, kind of across the board, they were interested in exploratory practice, but kind of concerned about it or unsure of it. This is one specific quote from a student's journal. I feel like I'm interested in exploratory practice, but I'm a little nervous. That was in September. But as time went on, overwhelmingly, the students were positive in their responses to it. So the same student 1 month later, she said, now I'm not nervous and we can imagine how to research, we can advance our topic. I think it will work well. So she had developed confidence and developed an understanding in exploratory practice. They started to realize, okay, we do have ownership of this process and we do get it. Our plan for future data collection by the end of this project, qualitative again, but maybe more formal and intensive. Again, we're using existing classroom practice, which is the genre of reflective essay. So right now they are learning those conventions, how to write a reflective essay, and then they can share their thoughts in that form. So those are some student reflections on exploratory practice. I'd like to share my own. First of all, what I've observed in our EP project, initially I had concerns, including my role as teacher. Also, I was worried if I give the students free rein in certain times in the semester, are they going to engage or are they going to be directionless or rudderless? Will they embrace autonomy and use it wisely? And those concerns we did find in our literature review. That's pretty common, that teachers who start with an exploratory practice project do have those similar concerns. However, I observed very positive outcomes. Students do appreciate having a teacher as a co-researcher, right? They don't feel afraid to approach me with questions or concerns or problems, at seeking advice and so on. Also, across the board, we had high levels of engagement. I never ran into a situation with students needing prodding or we also had really high attendance rates during the project. And of course, the projects being self-directed, they were completed on time and they exceeded expectations based on kind of project requirements. All of the students went above and beyond in the production of the information report. But I think any teacher who's interested in doing an exploratory practice project or incorporating EP philosophy into their class, please understand that it's not an on-off thing. It's not a black or white thing. It can fluctuate, or you can apply a soft or a hard approach to UP. So is your classroom teacher-led or is it student-led? It just depends on the situation or the project or what stage you're at. So you may do something much softer. You may instruct them on how to do a project, but give them a little bit of autonomy in selecting the themes or in selecting the topics, right? So you can decide kind of the scale at which you're going to incorporate EP. I had to develop the ability to read the room, and it is difficult in an online environment. I had to see if students were struggling or if they were confused or if they needed some direction, and then I would provide a little bit more teacher-led instruction or scaffolding. But I also didn't want to come in and step on toes or get in the way once they had motivation, once they had momentum. So reading the room is essential. And finally, I think as mentioned by Kevin, this example group was untiered. This is not a low or a medium or high tiered group. It is mixed tier. So there are discrepancies in performance and output, but that's not to say there were discrepancies in engagement. We did see maybe some shorter writing or writing with more grammar mistakes and whatnot, but all of the groups engaged at a very satisfactory level. Thank you. Those are my reflections on exploratory practice in my classroom. I think both Kevin and I would like to share our reflections on this specific action research project in this group. To echo what James and Andy and Amanda have said, meeting with Professor Burns was incredibly helpful. Right? She's an expert in the field of action research, and she was able to introduce us into specific areas of action research that we could talk about. And that helped us kind of shift our focus into participatory action research and then finally into exploratory practice. The second thing she really helped us with is regarding doing this project online. We were concerned with the COVID-19 pandemic that would throw a spanner in the works, as it were, but it didn't. I think she helped us see the benefits of doing this research online, being kind of on the front lines, testing out exploratory practice in online environments. I'll turn it over to Kevin, though. I think he has some ideas or some thoughts regarding our experience with the AR group.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll go quick. I know we're running up against time. The group meetings that we had were really interesting. As co-researchers, we frequently met to reflect and brainstorm, update. In group meetings, it was really great to see other projects. And as a kind of new or less experienced researcher, I really liked seeing other, like Amanda and Andy and James, talk about their projects. What were they facing? What questions they had? What changes were they making or doubts that they had? It was really nice to see that rather than seeing the finished project and thinking, there it is, perfect. You see the process. And I think that's really, really great. Throughout it all, I'd say as an extension of the AI process, it was almost as though all the group meetings and the class meetings and meeting with Matthew was like a through line. The similar theme was there's a process at work and people are asking questions, they're investigating, kind of exploring different things. So it was really helpful. I would definitely want to do it again in the future. That was really great. I think we want to end there for time. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks to the other presenters as well. Yeah, I'll turn it over to James. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Kevin and Matthew. Does anybody have any questions for Eve Rodman? You don't have to write it. You can just turn your audio off and ask them directly if you want.
Hi, this is Li Shen. I have a question about what Matthew said about student engagement. So were you referring to student engagement in the lesson, or are you talking about student engagement in the research project? And also, how aware are the students about, this project that they're in, as they are also part of the lesson, the content of the lesson?
Right. Yeah, and before going into the project, that was a point I really wanted to be at the forefront of second semester, that the curriculum was exploratory practice, like the content of the course was exploratory practice. So they were engaged in both, right? In both the lesson and the project, because it was the project, the lesson was the project. So we did have an initial unit before this example I showed you of an information report. We had a 3-week unit that was introduction to exploratory practice. So I did provide literature for students to read about exploratory practice. They had activities, group discussions, little kind of engaging quizzes, and we did a sample exploratory practice project together, where as a class, we developed one class question that we had about language learning, which ended up being, why do students kind of fall back on Japanese when they're in chat rooms? And it was interesting to see that together we helped develop kind of quantitative questions that we could put in a survey, and together we developed qualitative interview questions. So they're learning those genre conventions while we're putting the project together. And then they fill out the questionnaires and they understand how to do that. And then finally, we look at the data and we look for patterns. And even from that project, I found a lot of interesting information, right? That students didn't feel like they were using Japanese to sneak something, behind the radar, right? Or do something bad behind the scenes, but rather as a tool because they felt like they lacked vocabulary and they felt like they lacked the ability to expand on their ideas. And it's interesting seeing all the parts of the data come together that painted that picture. So those first 3 weeks were crucial for them to realize, no, this is your project. This isn't, because I'm sure some students have had the experience of suddenly a researcher comes in and asks them a bunch of questions and then leaves and they don't really know what happened, or they fill out a questionnaire at the end of the semester and they're not really sure where that goes. We really wanted them to understand this is your research project, you're part of the process. And so we did have kind of reflective journals and a chance for them to share their thoughts on it. Like, do you feel like you understand what this is? Do you feel like you understand your role in this? So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Could I also ask one more question? Okay, so how did you frame the objective of the research project to the students? Like, how? I'm just very impressed that the freshman students, like first year students, they usually struggle with articulating, what they want, and I'm just very impressed by the fact that you were able to get them all engaged in this project.
Yeah, I was very impressed too, and to this day I'm impressed by what they produced compared to years previously where I've done freshman reading writing. Yeah, I think in terms of your first question, we did have an initial discussion of what is research like, and there were a lot of kind of scaffolded activities to build up so that they finally felt like they understood, okay, classroom research is something that happens, here's, and letting them reflect on how that may have happened in their past experiences, like elementary, high school. And some of the students did remember, oh yeah, we had like a government census taker come in and ask a questionnaire, right? And then kind of redirect that into like, have you ever participated in research? And these think about times that they've done it, maybe like a science class or even in a language class. And then finally transition into like, well, what kind of things would you like to research about your own language learning? Like, what questions do you have? And it was helpful to provide a lot of models and examples because other EP projects have been done, not so many in Japan, but our literature review put together before this project, we looked at cases in public schools in India. We looked at a university in the UK that had a kind of similar situation to us, and we basically kind of extracted models and examples from that project so that they could see, oh, okay, these are questions other students similar to us have been asking. These are the processes those students went through.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Matthew, you've kind of answered Noriko's question there too, but Noriko, do you just want to repeat your question so everybody can hear it?
Hey, thank you for nice presentations. I'm very much interested in coordinated action research program because we, CEPAL SIG, actually initiated action research to implement the CEPA to curriculum and assessment and teaching learning. And we reviewed a lot of action research literature, including Burns. And it was so nice for your situation because Burns on your side and actually guiding individual action research. And I'm just wondering if you had some sort of discussion or learning or kind of professional development session on action research itself. In other words, what stages action research involve or what steps are necessary to conduct a themed action research.
And so Noriko, your questions for all of us, is that correct?
Well, I wasn't quite sure who is the facilitator of this coordinate
Sure.
action
So
research, and I
it's
thought
me, yeah.
it may be you.
Yeah, sorry, I thought it was a question for Kevin and Matthew. Yeah, so if I can just share my screen. So Anne came, she visited us, and can you see my screen okay, Noriko?
Sure, yes, thank you.
So during her visit, she came and did 3 talks, and she explained the idea behind action research. Yeah, is that what you mean? So she sort of went through what it meant. She had 3 talks, 2 workshops, and 1 presentation, and then she had individual consultations, and then an email went out describing all the processes. And by processes, do you mean, for example, these here: plan, act, observe, reflect?
Right. But of course, depending on whose action research model you follow, there are certain differences among the stages. But of course,
Right.
what stage you go through or what steps are necessary depending on your each project. But I was just wondering if you had some sort of discussion how to conduct your own action research before you initiate action research itself. Because in our case, in CEPHAL SIG, we 5 of us more or less initiating action research, and we did research on action research and tried to we decided what steps are necessary and so forth. And then we go to different themes of action research. And try to involve all members who are interested in action research in the CEPHAL SIG. So I was very curious how you did it. But now I see Anne Burns came to Kanda and then gave 3 lectures, and you probably discuss action research itself with her and among yourselves.
Yeah, and then after that, a call came out, and each person applied individually, and then each person sent their outline to Anne, and she sort of, she gave a general overview of what action research can or does entail, but then she spoke to each researcher, or in Kevin and Matthew's case, both of them, and sort of helped them fine tune their own action research.
Right. So you have very fortunate that you have her as a facilitator or helper.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, she's probably one of the best known people. That's why she was brought into the academic advisory.
Right. Yes.
And like Kevin and Matthew said, it's especially useful if you're intimidated doing research, or you're new to it, or you don't know how to go about doing action research. Is that answered your question? Or
yes, very much. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Kevin and Matthew, I thought it was specific to you.
No worries, no problem.
All right. Any more questions, either for Kevin and Matthew or for all of us? I think we've gone over time actually, but I think Patrick's keeping the room open in case anybody does have any questions.
Yeah, there's nothing else until the plenary, so the room is free.
Yeah, I just want to thank the researchers themselves, because we've talked about how Anne's been really useful and how much work she's done, but this year's been well, for everybody, I guess, with the coronavirus, it's been a particularly stressful year, and Kevin, Andy, and Amanda, Matthew, they've all kept really strictly to their own timelines, and they've presented, they've got papers ready, they're doing ongoing research. I think they've got more than 1 paper ready, each different project. So I just think it's really impressive that they've been managed to, we've got Anne Burns helping us, but they've put in a hell of a shift each too, so. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions, either for any of us specifically or for us overall?
I just want to say that while it was great that Professor Burns could help us at our school, and we're really fortunate, most schools won't have such a person as famous. So I think what I would advise people to do is find a researcher or a professor who's older, and perhaps more experienced and perhaps older, doesn't have to be older, but someone who's experienced and willing to mentor you. A lot of people know about action research and can help you looking at your data, looking at your RQs, you know, talking you back from the ledge if you're having issues. Just, you've got to really go out and find people who will be willing to mentor you. And sometimes you have to be the one to ask. You know, they're not going to offer it necessarily, although it would be great if they did, but they're not going to offer it. And like you, if you're doing a dissertation and you're looking for an advisor to advise your dissertation, that's a completely different thing. This is just for you wanting to, you know, get published or do some presentations, then you have to find them on your own, right? And I would just encourage anyone to do that or offer to do that for other people, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are really, really lucky to have, I mean, we're lucky overall to have that academic advisory board, but I'm glad that we were listened to and we were able to bring in Amber specifically for this purpose.
I wanted to add to what Amanda was saying about mentors and advising. Some of the advice I've gotten is that something like action research can take place pretty much anywhere. Now, granted, you might not have a comprehensive knowledge of the field. I don't know if anyone does, but if you're I mean, one of the things about research is staying motivated. And the thing that keeps me motivated is thinking about the quality of life in that classroom and about things you can do to make the classroom better, even incrementally with students. And I like action research and exploratory practice because it really is focused on that quality of life. I think if you keep your focus there, you start to develop interests and research interests sort of organically out of that experience with students. And that's what I've found. And that's something that a mentor could tell you, but if you start doing it and start looking in those directions, you're going to find a lot of interesting questions just coming out of that.
And
Yeah,
think,
sorry,
oh,
Matthew.
sorry, I think one of the benefits of exploratory practice, again, the founders of exploratory practice really wanted to stress that based on their observations and based on their own research, they saw how intimidating or overwhelming getting into research could be unless you have those resources, those support networks, in our case, where we are really lucky to have access to Ann Burns and to our peers. Exploratory practice is a nice practitioner research model in that one of the main purposes is to use what you have already, right? So if you are interested in seeing what your students are experiencing or getting your students' feedback on ways of improving or understanding your course, just use what you have, right? If you have group discussions, if you have journal writing, those are tools you can use to do this style of research, right? You don't have to get in over your head, as it were.
One of the myths I used to believe about research was that it always had to be cutting edge and innovative. It always had to bring something completely new. I thought, and it was so intimidating because I thought, well, why am I doing research? Clearly smarter people have already said these things. But actually the fact is, if it's new to your students and new to your classroom and your practice, that is going to be a benefit. So even if you might find, I mean, in our literature review, there's other teachers who are doing exploratory practice and it looks very similar to what we're doing, but they're doing it in another school, in another class with other students, and they're a different person. So there's like this very specific benefit you can get out of doing it that doesn't have to reinvent the wheel and change the world. It's just, you're really reflecting on your practice.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if it's new for the students themselves and it's bringing benefits to them, you don't necessarily have to find a new niche all the time. Does anyone else?
One quick question.
Go ahead, Alicia.
So usually when you want to do a research project, you need to write a proposal, right? And usually you need to have a very specific objective, or you need to kind of, you need to have a very clear question, research question when you write a proposal. But from your presentations today, it feels like a lot of you are still exploring. You know, you just want to collect data and see what happens from there. So how do you frame? How do you do that kind of proposal? That's my question. Thank you.
In the application form itself, it says if you have research questions, please state them. But you don't have to if you don't have any. But what's useful is that help them draft initial research questions, and the research application form itself says we understand that your questions may change over time. So yeah, and initially help them draft the initial question.
Even in our case, even though we are exploring, right, we're trying to understand the quality of life in our specific classroom, we still did, thanks to Ann Burns's guidance, we still did develop specific research questions. I think it was along the lines of, you know, how do students engage if they're co-researchers in a research project, right? How do they understand the research process if they're involved in it? So we did have some specific research questions for our primary research, the lit review and this project.
Thank you.
I noticed that one of the attendees is at the University of Sydney. So Shanli Pin, I'm sorry. So perhaps do you
Yes,
work?
me.
Do you work with Ann Burns sometimes, or do you see her around the campus sometimes?
No, I didn't get to see her because I did my master in educational leadership and management, so didn't get to involve in that aspect that much. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I just noticed she's an honorary professor at your university, so
Yeah, but she's not one of my professors, unfortunately. That'd be great though. I read a lot of I read a lot about her work and everything. Yeah, I just started doing some action research here in Cambodia. It's really limited, and there's so many limitations and restrictions here as well. And there's we really unfortunate because there not a lot of mentors to support us. Like me myself, I conducted in January, and then there's no one to support me. It's quite frustrating. You know, being told that, okay, cannot do interviews and stuff like that because I need to get the consent. I need to get the approval from the principal, and then it turns out no. But then anyway, but yeah, it's quite frustrating here.
So if you, is it Phnom Penh or Siem Reap?
Yes, it's in Phnom Penh. You been?
Yeah, I regularly go to Camp Tessel.
Really?
Yeah. So well, when
we're offering, I think we're running Camp Tessel next year.
Online.
Yeah. I'm working at IDP as well, so yeah.
So
keep
your
in touch
when you apply, sorry, Janet.
I said keep in touch.
Oh, sure, yeah, okay.
Sorry, were you saying?
I was just saying, when you apply and you're refused, is there no chance to resubmit? Is it just turned down completely?
Well, I needed to change my data collection method. I did only qualitative data collection from teacher, like observation or notes. I couldn't do the interview survey with student to get them to share their opinions. It's just that I get only one side of the story. So that's, yeah.
Okay. So maybe you can reapply it once you've adjusted it a little bit.
Well, maybe I give it a try. It's just that they say it would violate the child protection policy because a lot of my students are under 18, even though we have the consent form, but we're not allowed to do so, which is weird. Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, in Japan too, if you're teaching high school or junior high, you have to use a consent form where the parents have to sign off on it. It makes it really complicated, and yeah, I avoided doing research on my high school students when I was in high school, but I do know a lot of researchers who do it somehow. They get around it, so I'm curious about how they do it.
Yeah, the British Council.
Yeah. I wanted to do that, but my boss said, no, if they find out you've been in trouble, hope this part will be cut out in this video. It's recording, right? Anyway.
All right. Yeah, hopefully you can get it approved somehow, hey. I hope it works out for you.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you, James. Thank you, Amanda. Well,
does anyone else have any questions? I know we're well over time, so I'm sure people are tired and eager to get moving. Nobody has any questions, then we can wrap up, eh?
All right, then I guess thank you guys. We can give you a round of applause. We're supposed to like unmute and clap.
Thank you.
I don't know how awkward that is. But I guess if you want to continue, you can go to the breakouts. But I'll close the room.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you very much for your help.
Thanks for setting it up.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Good job.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.